Good morning and welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to learn more about what we do here, you can visit us at officehours.global. Our first hour is typically questions that we answer by you, the producers, on media and virtual production. And our second hour, we spent a little bit more time on, and today we'll be talking about lead generation and business development, some of the strategies and the tools that we use. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about phone rigs and discussing how to produce and some of the ideas around using phone rigs. And on Wednesday, it's all about green screen removal. We'll talk about the science behind the process and how to get some of the best results. And we also have a workshop at 9 a.m. where we'll be talking about web construction with Ken Jordan. On Thursday, it is talent support. How do you get the best out of your talent and support them both in person and virtually? On Friday, core documents make all events and productions go round, and we'll just discuss techniques of planning and all of that data. On Saturday, it is our long day, and we'll talk about how to build a how-to video. And now you've got to remember our third hour, which is the education hour, it will not be broadcasted. So you'll have to make sure that you've got the Zoom information so that you can be a part of it. And on Sunday, that is our introspective and philosophical day. It is not broadcasted. So make sure that you sign up. Again, just head over to officehours.global and let's get this show started. Let's go, Bill.
Thank you, Liberty. Our first question comes from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin, and he says, what is the official process for a live TV censor roll? Is the delay normally 7 seconds or 20?
Courtney.
Well, I guess it depends on the system that's being used. Usually it's 7 seconds or more. And it depends on whether it's an international broadcast or not. In America, we have standards and practices for each network. We'll have the responsibility of hitting the dump button if they hear something that is against the standards and practices of that particular network. If they're broadcasting and taking that feed internationally, they usually feed it out raw without any interruption, and it's up to the broadcasters in each individual country, if they have specific standards and practices of their own, to mute untoward segments that they don't want to air. And usually it's about a 7-second delay. They really can't do anything about the video other than to cut away to a shot of the audience or something else if something is happening on screen that shouldn't be shown.
Alex?
Actually, from last night's, I'm sure this came up.
I was thinking about that too.
From last night, it was a good example of the limits of it and also how it's used. So what you saw at the beginning of the incident that happened at the Oscars was that the person who came up on stage didn't give them any warning about what was going to happen next, and they probably wouldn't even know if it was part of the show or not part of the show until he started talking later. And so what you saw was an uncensored interaction on stage and a censored interaction once he sat down. So the 7-second delay in the United States, the only reason we see an uncensored version is because other countries didn't censor what he was saying. And so we saw the censor work the way it's supposed to in the second half of that, and but unable to, anything that's slow brewing is very hard to understand, what should and shouldn't, be in the show.
Mitchell?
I guess in context, the question is, are they censoring the audio or the video or both? And in the case of most censoring and the 7-second delay, I know the genesis of that, we used to just use a reel of tape. The tape would just roll around on two machines, and that's about 7 seconds. But with digital gear, I guess they can dump immediately and it'll build back up to the delay. So it can be a 5-second or a 2-second or whatever. But that's a tough job. I'm sure that whoever was on the button last night on the Oscars had his work cut out for him.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I've always been interested in how this all works, and I've also heard in sports what they'll do is they'll go from a 20-second all of a sudden to a 30-second delay if they find that they can't keep up with things. So I was just kind of curious if how that behind the scenes works, and if it's something that I'd actually be interested in trying.
Alex?
Yeah, audio delay for radio stations is relatively easy. Video delay is very expensive. So, that's the thing where if we go more than about a minute of delay, we oftentimes are using something like an EVS to do a shift that we have available. Evertz makes a tool that's just a video delay unit. And so it has a video in, video out, and it's delayed there, and you can just hit a button and it'll just jump basically 7 seconds it'll jump to real time. So that's the basic unit that's in a lot of these. And again, what we saw last night was we're operating exactly, the operator did exactly what they should, which is they don't know what's in the show and what's out of the show. They would have been fired if they had cut something out of a show like that was part of the skit. But they did block out the language that was used later, which is exactly what they were there to do.
Next question.
Joaquin, looks like Mattis in Imperial Valley, California, says, I'm helping launch a podcast for one of my companies and looking for a hosting distribution platform recommendation. Anchor seems like a popular choice due to the free nature, but generally with free hosts, you give up too much control of your IP. Suggestions?
Very true. Jeffrey?
That is actually, yeah, that's very true. One thing that podcasters have always told you is to control your RSS feed. So if you don't like the way that that Anchor is working, you can move it to something else. And of course, having something like a WordPress backend website controlling that RSS feed is probably one of the easiest ways to do it. You can also use something like Libsyn. You can use Blueberry's software to do that, the PowerPress software inside of WordPress as a plugin, and many other ways that you could actually control. You could actually even write your own RSS feed if you wanted to, if you're into that type of coding. So, but try and control your own RSS feed and you control your destiny.
Alex?
We could probably do a second hour about this. I'm trying to get some folks on to Dan Benjamin. I've been talking about having him come on and talk about it. He works on a bunch of those things. I've used Libsyn in the past. My sister uses it for her podcast. And then the other one that I've used the most, and we've used it at Twit as well, as CacheFly. So CacheFly is, you'll be kind of building your own. Libsyn's a lot more hand-holding, and CacheFly is a lot more inexpensive server, that's really, really 100% up. So, and Libsyn is as well. So those are the two that I've used the most.
Mitchell?
Another company that does a sort of a all things put together for you is Stream Guys. They're favored by broadcasters, but I've been using them for about 10 years, no problems.
Jason?
Plus one on what everyone said. I've used CacheFly quite a bit. The only thing that I would add to this is that FeedBurner was bought by Google, but it is an excellent way to quickly manage an RSS feed.
That's a good reminder. Yeah. Matteo?
Yes. Also, if you like managing your content, and if you have a host somewhere, a website that you're managing already, there's a great application which is called Podcast Generator, and you can find it on podcastgenerator.net. It's an open source program, and it will allow you to manage also your podcast, and it will publish it on all the different platforms for you.
Jeffrey?
I'd love to say yes on FeedBurner, but the reality is that a lot of people had many problems on FeedBurner, and there was a time where Google didn't even update the code. They had 2012 code, and it was something like 2018. I don't even know if they've updated it now to something more current. But what a lot of people have is when they publish their podcast, FeedBurner would not update the RSS feed to their RSS feed. And if you're going through that, you might find that within 24 hours, your podcast still doesn't go up on iTunes or anything like that. So it's still best to go right to the source, the RSS feed.
Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Tlaluc Miguel Lopez Waterman in Salisbury, Maryland. And he asks, could we all ask filmic Pro, to add more timecode functionality? I used an iPhone 13 this past week as a B camera. It would have been awesome to jam timecode to that footage.
Courtney?
Well, it might be possible to maybe use GPS. The problem with professional timecode, accurate timecode, is it needs to have a temperature-compensated crystal in there, which most phones don't really have, to stay accurate over a longer period of time once you jam them. If you're outside, maybe they could arrange something to use the universal time from the GPS to put it in sync. But, most people don't understand timecode because of all the flavors. There's integer and non-integer, 23976 and 24 and 30 and 2997, drop frame and non-drop frame. There's so many variables in there that I'm sure a normal consumer would probably get it wrong anyway, and it wouldn't stay in perfect sync.
So basically, they're saving us time, is what you're saying, Courtney. Bill?
Alex reminded me last week that you do have audio input often, and it depends on the interface you use. One of the things I was surprised about is that Filmic allows for Bluetooth audio in, which I've used to good effect in terms of a wireless mic being recorded, muxed into the video signal, which is really helpful if you're doing interview kind of things and you want to get off the camera mic. So really it's a matter of there's a lot of functionality, but some of it just doesn't pass through. It would be nice if they had a simple way to do that, but as Courtney mentioned, I'm not quite sure technically how they can do it. Maybe Alex has more ideas.
Alex?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to sync those cameras. Number one is I would never do anything that would get rid of the audio completely, because the easiest way to sync this back up is the audio track. So if I was capturing wild audio on that phone, it would take me less than 30 seconds to sync that phone with other footage, as long as they both had wild audio. So that's the easiest way for us to kind of grab onto that. The other thing to look at is a slate. So if you have a time-coded slate, that can be an iPad slate or a Denicky or something like that. You can actually make sure that all the cameras see it. And then what you can do is go into Final Cut or Resolve or whatever. And I know that in Final Cut, you can simply go to a frame. You'll see the slate number. You type that. You just say, in this frame, the time code for this footage is that. You just literally type what you see into the frame in Final Cut, and it'll rebuild the time code on the video. And so a slate with that is a great way to. We used. When we don't have cameras that can handle time code, we've used those slates a lot. The trickier way to do it would be probably to feed LTC into your mixer, mixing, and then use Bluetooth in some way, shape, or form to go with the stereo track. So you have the mic track, and then you also have the LTC in another channel. Because if you put LTC into the phone, you won't have any wild audio, and that's not something you want, in my opinion. But I think that the easiest way to do it would be just the iPad app with the slate with little numbers across it. I just make sure that all the cameras saw it, and that would be a relatively easy way to fix it.
Next question.
Don Modine comes, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Graham Cardwell comes to us from Belfast, Northern Ireland. We are setting up a small team to shoot pre-recorded video announcements for church. What sort of technical, not content, information should we be including in our guidance notes or style guide to ensure a consistent end product? Thanks.
David?
So I would actually suggest that you do what we do here, which is to have am I too loud? I'm getting ears a little bit. Sorry. I would do what we do here. So I would bring them in, and I would have a Fenwick framer, and I would do their levels, their audio levels, and check all of that. My limited experience is that I can tell people what I want them to do, but that doesn't always mean they're going to do it. So if I'm here with them, holding their hand, walking them through it, I get better results.
Alex?
Yeah, matching someone who has experience with someone who doesn't is one of the key things to do constantly, because it's the easiest way to train someone. You give them something that's a guide, and it's hard. But if you know what you want, you can get that. I think that a lot of what David said also, just the basic framing is good. Oftentimes it depends on the resolution of your camera. So if your camera is a 4K or 6K, you may shoot a little wider. That gives you somewhere to bounce in and out. So if you want to do, cuts, it doesn't look like a jump cut, because if you shoot a little wider with a 6K, you've got a lot of resolution to work with. I'm a big fan of just generally good, large, soft lighting. That just helps. When in doubt, when someone doesn't know what to do, really large sources of light are good for people generally. And generally, when I tell people to light things, I tell them I want you to go as high as you can until you stop seeing the highlights in their eyes. So as soon as if they're looking straight ahead and you see just the highlights across the top of their eyes, that's the height that I generally, if I'm trying to give someone a rule of thumb, I want them to be right in front, up, large, and I want to see that highlight there. That helps a lot, with people. Obviously, great DPs will do a lot of other things that are great, but if you just want someone to not look bad, that's a good place to start.
And then I will just jump in there and just having that checklist for them to, whether that be you pre-record it, kind of to David's point, if you pre-record it and walk them through the steps and how and showing them, it's always easier to show them better than you can tell them. And that'll be a great way to just help with the consistency, and also giving them enough time so that you can give them feedback afterwards once you've actually collected the footage, and just to be able to QA it. Alex?
And nowadays, we oftentimes are looking through Zoom. So send them out with a laptop that can connect to Zoom. So if you're not going to be there, especially on their first couple, it's great to have someone who knows what they want to get looking through the camera. So the camera tap goes into Zoom and you can see what they're looking at and then tweak it. But really that real-time feedback while they're doing it will go a long way.
Yes. Next question.
Don Modine in Manchester, Connecticut says, how do you deal with unexpected, unwanted events when producing a live broadcast? Do you try to hide it, show it in full, or cut to black?
Courtney.
Well, if you have it recording on ISO, you can cut to black and still have it recorded. Newsworthy events are probably worth a lot of money, so you don't want to cut to black and dump the only copy of it. The only time you really run into this, most live events that are entertainment events now have a delay, as we spoke about earlier. The only place you'll run into this usually is local news, where they're doing live helicopter shots or traffic shots or a live report from the field. Most of that stuff is not delayed more than a few seconds, a couple of seconds at most, because they have to be able to talk back and forth and ask questions to the reporter in the field, etc. So usually, if the TD's paying attention, he can cut away back to the anchor desk. You could go to black if you have nothing else to go to, or a bumper slide if something happens that you have no control over and no place to go to, no camera shots that aren't covering it. There's usually the typical technical difficulty slide that you cut to when you have no other options.
Mitchell?
Yeah, as Alex said earlier on that incident last night on the Academy Awards, it was done as well as they could. And I thought they did a good job with it. Sometimes you just cannot avoid a problem of the live broadcast, whether you have a delay or not. And I think the best way to do it, or at least it's been my experience, if something happens that was bad, you don't call attention to it, you don't apologize for it, you simply move on. And don't get people because some people weren't paying attention or didn't hear it, and they're going to say, what happened? What happened? And if you just stay with it as it's something that it's in the past, let's move on.
Right. Bill?
I'm going to disagree with my friend there. And to me, I thought about this a lot because I have produced stuff for a long time, and it is the producer's responsibility, and you have to make a lot of decisions, and particularly you have to set a tone in advance of a lot of things. One of the most critical aspects of whatever I have done in terms of producing work is workplace safety. And so I immediately went to that as my heart and soul of this. What happened to breach workplace safety? Because somebody got hit, somebody got assaulted on a show that I would have been responsible for. My immediate reaction, and I don't care what's on the line for it, would have been to, in a quiet time, go to commercial or whatever, had the person who struck escorted out of the thing. And I don't care about the results. I don't care about the publicity people or whatever. If you, as a responsible party at the head, allow any kind of violence on one of your employees, and they were all, in a sense, employees, you've lost control of your workplace, and I would find that utterly unacceptable. So that's how I would have dealt with it. I know people have different things, but it comes down to making sure that every single employee at every level understands that they will be your first concern. Their safety will be your first concern, period.
Alex?
I think it does lean us towards, as we talk about this, is that, the importance of those tech slides, those will be right back slides. Now, one of the things is that I don't usually use technical difficulty slides. I usually use will be right back, and I don't put the logo on it. So I know people tend to want to do that, but that becomes a meme. So a lot of times I have something, and we have gone through great lengths to build great emergency videos and slides and everything else that are there. We joke that when did Noah build the ark? Before the rain. so that's your ark, and so you build it carefully before the rain, and so you want to be careful. That's still a place that you can be creative. And the more creative you are and the better you build that, the less chance there is. Murphy's Law is the better your tech slides, the less chance there is something that's going to go wrong. So I think that having good tech slides, or always knowing where you will go if something goes wrong. We have a lot of rehearsals often about what are we going to do if something goes sideways, and knowing where that is important.
Next question.
Next one comes from Matteo Mazzeri. Oops, I've got this out of whack here. Let me get it back where I can still read it. There we go. Dear panelists, when traveling, what is your essential gear to be up to audio, video, office hours 2 standards and travel light? With love and respect. Thank you, Matteo.
Jason?
Traveling light is probably not super light, but I'll take a 6K Pro, plug in an ATEM Mini, and use a head-worn mic with usually a Sennheiser body pack.
+1 on that one. Nigel?
Yeah, I would go a little lighter than that. I would take my Brio with me. I would take a Pulsum, which isn't great sound, but is I think good enough. And then the important thing is all the connectors and cables, because I always find that the cables are much shorter when you're in your hotel room, wherever you are and you think you are. So I brought lots of those with me.
Jeffrey?
Oh, it's depending on what you're going to be doing. For me, light is 150 pounds worth of suitcases, and that includes some clothes. The one thing that I use a lot of times is this light. I've shown this before. This is a fabric light that goes 3,300 to 5,600 Kelvin. It pulls up and all Velcroed in. The frame comes apart. It's about 4 pounds. You put it on a good cowboy stand, which is also probably about 3-4 pounds right there. Once again, if that's something you need to really light an area, if you're doing like one-on-one interviews, the best part about that light is I can wrap it around a pole or something like that and really splay the light out. Other than that, yeah, it's wireless stuff. It's about 50 pounds that goes over my head, and then another three suitcases that go underneath the plane.
Alex?
Yeah, for me, for just the basic office hours, I have been at a hotel doing that, and I'm using a Brio. So I use a Brio that I have just on top of my computer. I carry a lot of stuff on. I have a carry-on that is the standard carry-on, 22 by 14 by 9, and I use that as the base for my laptop, and then I put the Brio on top of that. I have 4 NAND lights, 2 of them for me and 2 of them for the room to color it, and then I have and all of that, and then I have a Mix Pre 3 with a Countryman H6 headset. The headset is mostly because it's really small and light, and that's pretty much my setup with a little, with an earpiece or whatever. That all fits in a very small portion of my carry-on bag. So unless I'm going particularly long, it's enough to fit there comfortably without even taking any room in my backpack.
And our +1, what's been said, typically will be a 6K Pro, the ATEM Mini Pro, and depending, I might not take cables. And I'll say this from the vantage point of I'll just find a Walmart nearby and just make sure I'll pick up a pretty long Ethernet cord, just depending on where I'll be shooting. So that's how I handle that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next on the list here. And Douglas, in this case, says, I remember, I'm having trouble. Oh, there we go. I remember attending a festival where the LED walls had to be reinitialized, and I saw PLL Lock OK on the processor LED display. What could that mean? Jason?
So I'm not sure, but if I were to guess, it would be phased lock loop, which is not just LEDs. Anything with a voltage controlled oscillator needs to be in phase lock, because if it's not, you end up with all sorts of problems.
Courtney?
Yeah, it is what he said. Phase lock loop is a synchronization signal that goes between each one of those panels, because you got to think each one of those panels is receiving a separate video signal, and they all have to be changing on vertical sync at exactly the same point in time. Otherwise, when they cut from one frame to another, some of the panels may be quarter of a frame behind or a third of a frame behind. So they all have to report back that they're receiving a sync pulse, and they're all in sync together, and they report back to the master controller. And that's probably what the PLL sync means.
Mitchell?
A phase link sync is the best sync of all. And as the graphic was showing earlier, when you have 2 waveforms, the zero crossing point is the same. You want to have them all lined up and at the same point. Once that's done, there's not going to be a problem between the different panels maintaining the image integrity and keeping everything in proper phase lock.
Alex?
This is why the panel exists. I saw that question and I was like, I have no idea what that is. And I Googled it and I still didn't know what that was. And so anyway, well answered. Anyway, that's why we need a lot of people here with a lot of different experience.
Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland is up next. He says, do the Blackmagic Pocket cinema cameras support servo zoom lenses? And if so, which ones?
Nigel?
Yeah, I don't know about the 6K, but the 4K definitely does. And I've put a link on the in the meeting chat with to a Blackmagic link, which talks about Panasonic Luminex and Olympus lenses that do operate with that way. I would tell you that some of those lenses are quite hard to get new, but you can find them secondhand all over the place.
Noah?
It's definitely been kind of a weakness for Blackmagic, and I think it's pretty well aware. So for the 4K, you do have the MFT mount, right? That's what Nigel was just talking about. And so I'll show you a few on the Canon side for EF for the larger 6K. So if you get this 18-135, you can also pair it with this power zoom adapter. So you do have some sort of control. Now this is kind of a workaround and is the cheapest solution that I've seen. Working up the line here, you can get these CineZoom compact lenses. Obviously the price tag's much more, and so there's two variants that I know of. It's the 18-80 and, like I said, the 70-200. But this is the primary reason why I'm still on Sony, because of the lenses that you have there. And so the cheaper power zoom that you can have on a Sony, this 18-105, is about $650. You can get it used for about $400, but I also have the 28-135 and the 18-110 in my kit. So just depends on your selection and what you need there.
Thanks, Noah. Bill?
I just say, remember, this is through an outboard system. The camera itself does not have the lens connectors to support onboard connection for servo zoom and things like that. You can do it through that or a lens kit, or there's a variety of different geared systems with motors that you can attach to it. But your camera as it is, if you just take a B4 lens that should be controllable and put it on there, it's not going to do anything, just to let you know that.
Alex?
Yeah, and the lens kits that Bill's talking about, Red Rock Micro, Teradek, Preston, all make ones that are basically, you have a rail system that comes out from underneath the camera. You have little motors, and you can, even with still lenses, you can attach these gears to them, and then put these little motors on, and then once you get them tweaked, you can control them wirelessly or even from the handles of the tripod.
Next question.
Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California says, remember the coffee challenge from almost 2 years ago? I'm ready for office hours to have a new challenge for everyone. What should it be? Saltwater taffy.
Jeffrey?
I was thinking about this weekend because we got on a big chili kick, and we ended up making a big pot of chili yesterday. It was a lot of fun. And I kept thinking, gosh, this would be a great office hours. But then other than that, the other thing that I was thinking about was doing something outside, maybe even a time lapse, like a springtime flower grow type thing, or grilling outdoors to kind of bring the cameras outdoor and kind of work on our outdoor audio video skills.
And for those who weren't here during the challenge, if I remember correctly, it was just showing how you make coffee. Was that it, Alex?
Yeah, it was just basically the how to make coffee, how you make coffee. And what was fascinating about it is everybody made it differently, and there was a lot of, not only did everyone make it differently, but they approached the training differently. And I think that if we did it again, we're going to do we'll show some of these this weekend, because we're going to talk about making how-to videos. So we'll show a couple of the coffee challenges. I think the first thing to do is do the coffee challenge again, and then just kind of reset. That was very early days of office hours, and so it would be a really interesting thing to come back and see, because I know that my coffee techniques have actually changed dramatically since COVID has invested in more hardware. So it'd be fun to show again. Yeah.
Or we can add tea challenge for those who don't
coffee or tea. I think we had actually some people who did tea instead of coffee. So nice. So I think that is that would be great too.
Jason?
I'd love to reshoot my coffee challenge, but no, plus one for Jeffrey. I mean, a camera slider, or even just, $150 gimbal on an iPhone. I love the idea of, because of the diverse locations that we come in on, I love the idea of just doing some sort of outdoor time lapse, because it's easy and it's inexpensive, and there's just so many ways to do it well.
I think sometime last week during one of the shows, there was a talk about us moving and getting active. So I'll toss in like some kind of movement challenge of however it is outside of just being at your desk, how you get some exercise in. Next question.
Graham Cardwell's up next from Belfast, Northern Ireland. He says, looking for recommendations for a around 2,000 pound, I assume this is British pound, video camera for studio talking head announcements and occasional location shoots. SDI out, servo, zoom, and manual audio inputs are must-haves. Thanks.
Noah?
Used Sony FS5.
And there you have it. Next question.
Okay. Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina says, if I'm using my Blackmagic Design and Pocket 6K just as a webcam, do I need to worry about a LUT or simply shade it via the app each time I use it?
Jason?
You all will almost never hear the panel say, oh, no, don't worry about this really bespoke and super important thing that will totally help. That said, no, you can constrain it to video and it will get you most of the way there, assuming you're white balanced. But no, I mean, a LUT is always better than not a LUT, assuming that it's a good LUT.
Alex?
Yeah, the LUT as a starting point. The problem really is that the LUT is the raw camera output is in log, and the what you're pushing out through the switcher is in linear. And so the problem that you'll have is that you really can't get there from here. So if you don't do some kind of LUT, so you might do video extended. A lot of times I do video extended because I want to have more control in my switcher. The best thing to do is to use a LUT to get it as close as you possibly can to what you're happy with, and then go from there and just do fine adjustments in the switcher.
Bill?
And the Pocket 6K does come with ATEM software, including the ATEM software control. If you are using an ATEM Mini or something like that, you have a great way to set your camera color balance values and save it into that system, such that when you reboot the camera, you just say restore, make another click, and you're right back to where you were before. In that case, if you have a preset that you like and your camera is looking good, you don't have to fiddle with it every time. You just reload that. It's kind of a way to get around needing a LUT.
Jason?
And that two-shot of both Alex's camera and mine is a really good example of why a LUT makes a difference. I think are we both on a 6K?
Yeah.
In which case, there's the difference. Mine looks desaturated.
That's a great example. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico says, in live events like the Oscars, how do you avoid showing the teleprompter and give away the punchline from camera operators to technical directors?
Courtney?
Well, you don't have camera shots that show the teleprompter, especially if you're doing a reverse. And on live award shows, what they do have is a teleprompter switcher. So it runs through the switcher, and they know ahead of time, when the TD knows ahead of time, if he calls for a reverse shot that's going to include the teleprompter, they will blank the teleprompter as long as no one's reading from it. So if it's between, people, they never blank the teleprompter if someone is reading from it, obviously, because that would panic the talent. And these days, they just try and avoid shooting it and frame it out of most frames. Occasionally, I noticed during the Oscar broadcast, especially when the camera is handheld and went backstage, they'd go by the assistant director's or stage manager's console, which has a feed from the teleprompter, and you would see the teleprompter's feed, so you'd see the upcoming lines there that may not have been going out into the audience, but they forgot about the fact that, you're seeing that behind the scenes, you're going to see the teleprompter, so occasionally it gives away the joke or gives away the upcoming lines.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. He says, setting up another M1 Mac Mini. This time came pre-installed with Monterey. Can't seem to pair that with a Logitech K380 Bluetooth keyboard during the setup process. Is there a trick to pairing non-Apple accessories?
Jason?
Yeah, USB. Just get past that little pairing thing, and then you'll be just fine to use anything you want.
Jeffrey?
The bigger problem is that keyboard is Bluetooth 3.0, and Mac's starting to not allow older Bluetooth connections. And even with when I had my 2012 MacBook, once I got past I can't remember which level, a lot of my Bluetooth stopped working. There are ways around it, and if you're really interested, you'll have to really do some deep dives on how to do it. But Bluetooth 3.0, I'd replace the keyboard at this point.
Mitchell?
I'm with Jason on this one because Bluetooth just can have problems. And believe it or not, Apple does not make a USB keyboard anymore, but you can get them from OWC.
Jason?
And okay, I'll give it to you. If you're really in a pinch, a dedicated pre-bonded amp dongle will do this, but don't go there.
Next question.
Brandon Buttram in Indianapolis, Indiana is up next. I purchased a license for the Waves WLM Meters Plugin. I'd like to use OBS to host the plugin, but it's a hack to get it to work. Are there any other free programs that can also host that plugin on a PC?
Alex?
I think, and I'm not 100% sure that Reaper will. I think Reaper is free, and you can host it there and then capture the screen.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, Reaper will do that. The other thing is the voice meter software. You can get that as a mixer, and then you can create a virtual pass-through using another piece of software. There's multiple versions. I use a program called Contable, which will then, this is basically a patch bay. And then you bring in your audio in one, and then you bring in the meters, and then you patch it out to your source, which is usually like back into the voice meter, or you can use the VB cable option, which could bring it into like Zoom or anything like that. I've done that several times.
Next question.
Don Modine of Manchester, Connecticut says, Beyonce opened the Academy Awards with a performance on a tennis court. Was this performance live or pre-recorded?
Courtney?
Well, I don't know, but I would guess it was pre-recorded the previous day because of this complex setup, and because of you can use more cameras that way, and you don't have to deal with sound problems and a live shot, and they just shot it around the same time of day on the location the day before, and there was no back and forth between the performers and the people on the stage, so you didn't have anything to anchor it in time with. So my guess was it was either designed to be pre-recorded, or it could have been a pre-recorded rehearsal, because they're rehearsing that thing a couple of days in advance. Alex?
Yeah, a good live producer will never do anything live that they don't have to. so like, if you do it as an if there's interactivity, if there's back and forth, if people are doing something like that, then you have to go live. But if you can avoid it, you're always going to live is always a liability. So you do it when you have to, but not for no reason.
Copy that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he asks, what would you think of a second-hour lab on FPGA, field programmable gate arrays, programming, or simple audio-video hardware design?
Alex?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. We just need to find someone to do it. So put it in the second hour, and if someone in our group knows enough about it or knows someone who does, we'd love to do a second hour on FPGAs.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with, I've seen a lot of older 1970s and 80s bands using modern sample-based digital synthesizers, the Yamaha MONTAGE and the Roland FANTOM, live instead of the synths that were used on the original track. And he has a link there and says, why could that be?
Jason?
I love the way you phrased this question, and the answer is pretty simple. The Minimoog, all of these analog synthesizers are expensive, and they are, as far as for all intents and purposes, are identical with their modern and less expensive and easier to maintain counterparts. So it's all about the performance when you're on tour.
Courtney?
Well, it's more than just the cost, because those bands can afford it, believe me. It's because those analog synths don't have digital presets that you can save. And sometimes in the studio, when they're creating that sound that's on the record, it'll take them an hour and a half to get the synth tuned into the exact sound that they want. And it's all analog knobs. Those positions, if you want to record what that setup was that created that particular sound on an analog Minimoog or Prophet, you had to take a picture of the knobs and save that, and then try and get those knobs into the same position. You couldn't just take a digital snapshot of it and save it, which modern day, the synths, the emulators that they have now that emulate those analog synths digitally, can of course save that setup and regenerate that sound instantly. So in a live performance, they can go instantly to load that pre-recorded setup for that particular analog synth sound, and it'll sound exactly like it did on the record without having to twiddle 22 knobs to get it to sound exactly right.
Mitchell?
I agree with Courtney. Another part of the question may be, why do you want to do it? An example might be a Hammond B3, which is a wonderful sounding device, but it was notorious for falling out of tune if you looked at it cross-eyed. So having a good emulated Hammond B3 is probably a preset you'll find on most modern synthesizers, because the real thing just is a pain.
Jeffrey?
About 5 years ago, I actually did an interview with the band America, and I asked them that same question, and they basically said that it was, one was the fact that that they had less crew to build this stuff. The second thing was, of course, the weight. You bring an organ. I have a friend that brings one of those Hammonds to all his gigs, and every weekend he's sitting there repairing his organ so he can use it for the next week's gig. But the other thing is just the fact that when you get it on stage, the digital counterparts are easier to set up, easier for the sound guy to connect up to, and sound the best that it can on stage, because there's lots of things that can go wrong. You just want one less thing to worry about.
And Bill?
Removing failure points. Alex brought it before, and it's so critical. I have a friend, actually, when my son was in grade school, one of his buddies' dad was a piano tech with high-end touring groups. And he said, when they roll that baby grand or that grand out on stage, we've gutted it and put a keyboard in there that we can plug into. There is no strings. That's not how they function. You cannot tour with a grand piano and keep it in tune. You have to make it fail-proof, and that means that they have multiple keyboards, and in the case of a half an hour, they can extract keyboard A and put keyboard B before they roll the baby grand or grand out on stage. It's just a business. That's how it works.
And remember, if you have any questions around media or virtual production, now would be a great time for our panel to continue to answer your questions. Next question
comes from you, Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. How would you have handled the incident that took place during the Oscars last night?
Alex?
That could be handled in so many different directions, like for everybody involved. So, if I was the host, I would have never said what I said. If I was the person who stood up on stage, I would hope that I would maintain composure. I'm not sure. And if I was the director, I'd probably do almost the exact same thing, except I probably wouldn't have cut to, I mean, the thing is that in the heat of the moment, you can't make any decisions about what a director should do because they're live. They have, they're following the action, and there's kind of a lower brain part of your, that you're just kind of managing the conversation. Like you're cutting to the conversation here, and you don't know what's actually happening. You may not even be clear what Mr. Smith was saying. And so I think that there is I think that they probably did it about exactly the way you should do it. like there was not any, I would not second guess anything other, that was there.
Yeah, because I was wondering if they'd cut to commercial, that would have been difficult. There's already, you have certain insertions. I
will say, if they had cut to commercial right there, no one would have known it happened. Like what I mean by that is if they had cut right to the commercial, it would have been unclear that it was not part of the show. You know what I'm saying? Like it would have been it was the fact that I think nobody knew, no one knew what, again, this is in defense of the technical director that was there cutting a show, is that even the audience laughed when it happened because they didn't know that until it had context,
right? No
one knew. So if they had done that cutaway and then come back with some funny quip, it probably would have just blown over, but the reality is that, I mean, I'm sure that on the other side of that is the Oscars desperately needed a shot in the arm. They're going to be on Hulu in 5 years. So at the rate they're going, so it probably was, it probably helped them more than hurt them.
Right. Bill?
I probably telegraphed this in my earlier response, but I would have handled it entirely differently. I lay this on the producer, who's ever the top of the pyramid. This is the kind of thing where only that person can make the decision. And the only decision that I would have ever supported would be the moment flesh met flesh from any two people in the process in any way. Whoever struck the blow would have been, the publicist would have been contacted. Can they meet me in the lobby? And they would have been 86th. And I don't care who it was. That's how I would have suggested it go. And they could have said whatever they wanted when the award was given out. But the idea that a violent act does not get met with sure and swift punishment of some kind is just terrible to me. I mean, you've got so many people watching this, and it was such a moment that could have been consequences versus losing control. And all of that got washed away in the fun of the show. And I just think that's terrible.
Courtney, you might be on mute.
Sorry,
Okay.
Problem with my mute button. A live TV, guys. Come on. I don't blame the producer TD because in a situation like a live award show like that, there's so many moving parts. There's no way to keep track of, and you've got two comedians involved. They plan stuff. Presenters plan to spring stuff on the Oscars all the time. They don't tell anybody. They want it to be a surprise. So I'm sure the TD and the director didn't know it was coming, thought it might be a bit that these two had arranged ahead of time. And so they went with it. When they cut to a close-up of Will when he was spewing expletives, they had cut the audio because they could hear the audio, and they had a 7-second delay that they could cut. Unfortunately, you have a room full of lip readers because of Coda being nominated for an Academy Award this year. And so obviously it didn't get by a lot of people, and there's no way to instantly blur someone's lips. Maybe with AI in the future they can do that and have it auto-detect certain expletives and automatically track their mouths and blur it out. I'm sure it's possible these days with all the little hats we can put on people's heads in live broadcasts. But unfortunately they didn't have that technology available last night.
Right. That AI, that's a pretty good one there, Courtney, to just come on. And it's interesting because I watched the first bit and the opening as most, and it wasn't until I saw it on social that folks were saying, did that really just happen? And to, I think it was Alex's point earlier, that just brought all the attention back. But when I went back to look at it and just wondering, yeah, it looked normal because they were laughing at the original joke. And I think just that mental time delay of like, wait, they just said something. So whether it was cutting to commercial, cutting else, but it would have been hard to even cut to the audience without, because that would have just amplified everything. So I truly didn't know besides cutting to commercial. So I wanted to hear what everyone had to say there. Jason.
+1 on not faulting the TD. I think your job is to follow the action. And once once you are in the middle of calling a show, it's, you do it almost instinctively. I've got to say, I love Bill's answer, and I would hope that I had kind of the presence of mind to act on something like that. Who knows?
Mitchell?
Yeah, I don't think that would happen. But in reality, I think that it only went off the rails when they went back to Will, and Will was obviously spouting what he was. And I think that it's also, there's a little bit of context here. And I'll just briefly say it, just for those that are judging Will and Chris, is that Will's wife, Jada, has a medical condition which made her lose her hair. And I think that's what started the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I read as well. Bill?
I understand all of that. And I understand all the dynamics, and the power was equal, and there was a lot of things that make this easier, that make this more difficult than figuring out. But you strip away all the celebrity and all the glitz and all the money and anything else. This was a simple workplace violence incident, and it should have been handled as that, period. The signal has to be that everyone will remain safe. And if you let your emotions get out of control, no matter who you are, if you're the lowliest PA or the secondary producer of the show, it has to be a no right now. And at that point, I would have said nothing else matters, because you are sending this message out to 1 billion people that if somebody loses control and takes a shot at somebody, there has to be immediate consequences. That's how I feel about it, and other people will disagree, and I respect that. But I think this is a bright red line, because workplace violence is an issue. It's been there for decades, and it's got to be suppressed.
And that's why we have the panel, so we can have all these voices sharing and learning from each other. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Lacoustics now offers free spatial mixing on headphones in any DAW with L-ISA Studio. And he has a link there. Could you see that removing the competitive advantage of Logic in the spatial DAW market?
Alex?
Yeah, I'm just digging into Elisa right now, and we are. It's a really powerful tool. It actually works inside of a lot of the other DAWs, so it can actually work with Logic, with Pro Tools, with a lot of other things. So it's a really interesting surround tool, and I think that it's something we're going to be playing with a lot in the future, and we're going to try to get them on to talk more about it.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia. Now the Dante DVS is compatible with M1 Max. Has anyone given it a spin to see if there are any issues?
Jason?
I have, as quickly as I can. It's been out for a week, and you could only do so much testing in a week. But yes, it works, and it seems to be relatively stable. I will remind everyone that Dante works its absolute best when you give it its own Ethernet. Don't commingle.
Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota says, in the 2.0 format, it would be nice to know who is on the panel at the top of the show. It would be nice to know everyone who is on board to encourage more questions. How could you do that?
Interesting. Jeffrey?
Could we do it like the match game used to do it with the wah, da, 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 da.
Alex?
I think having the general grid is good. I don't like a lot of preambles. I'd like us to get to. In fact, I think that Monday's the hardest day because we tell you what's coming up the whole week, and I've been thinking about whether that's even necessary. So I think that I'm trying to shorten that open rather than make it any longer than it already is.
So when you say that of like possibly not having the whole week, and again possible of just people like sending the email out with the topic of the day and show up for this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that talking about what's coming up today, and then talking about what's today, and then tell people to go to officehours.global for the schedule, I think might make more sense. I mean, I've literally been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks of just like, maybe we should just shorten it because I feel like it's a long preamble, and there's other things that we might want to put back into it so that preamble has become so long that we don't say things like there's a Discord, there's a place to go for after hours. There's some other front cells that we may want to do in that piece, but I don't want it to get longer than it already is. So if we say this is what's coming up in the second hour, and if you'd like to know more about what's in the second hour, go to our website, kind of thing. I think that might be. I don't know. We'll play with it. I'll play with it for the rest of the week, and then you, Liberty, watch and decide what you do on your show, and then we'll just go back and forth. So
I like that, Chris.
Yeah, Tommy's question specifically was he just wants to know who's on the panel to know who he can ask questions of. I think possibly you could solve that just by slightly more heavily weighting the multi-view, whether it's 9 or 16 or whatever it can be on any given day, in the first 5 minutes of the show, so you can watch it. And we've talked about, I know I feel a little claustrophobic when I don't get to see the whole panel.
Alex?
Yeah, and one thing that we're working on, one of the many things we're working on, is an invite system so that we actually know a couple days ahead of time at least who's going to be on the panel on any given day. And then I think that that's something that we could put in the in the notes, of this is the panelists that are going to be onto this inside of the website. That way you can go up and go, oh, this person, the person that I've been waiting for this will be there. So we'll take a look at that too.
Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton in the U.S. says, Alex, can you talk about any development around the in-person events that may be coming up near you?
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, no in-person events. so I mean, in person as far as production goes, yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
so,
sorry.
Yeah, we're going to be doing some tests. We'll talk about it more in after hours. I can't talk about it too much on YouTube, but we're going to be doing a bunch of R&D around concerts. And if people are interested if they're in the area and they're interested in coming to play, they're there's going to be a handful of times. There's a lot of times when we're actually hiring a big crew to do some big tests, and then there are times when we can just play with the stage. We've got a big stage with smoke machines and lights and stuff like that, so we're going to kind of mix and match that. So if people are interested and you're in the Bay Area or can be in the Bay Area, we'll be doing it all of April. So it should be a lot of fun. We'll talk more about it in after hours.
Next question.
Next one comes from Don Modine in Manchester, Connecticut. How much longer can award shows last on TV or just in general?
Courtney.
Well, I don't think they're going to go away. Maybe on network they may move to lesser networks, but now that we have cable channels and streaming channels and pay-per-view, and all kinds of avenues to watch all kinds of entertainment. I think they're proliferating. That's the problem. Is there used to be just 3 networks, and there used to be just 1 Academy Awards and 1 Emmy Awards, and that was it. And then we developed the Spirit Independent Awards, the People's Choice Awards, the Screen Actors Guild Awards, the Cinematographers Awards, the Audio Guys Awards. And it has become very stratified, and there's award season. And we call it award season in Hollywood. There's a whole 4 or 5 months here where there's so many award shows that you're going night to night to a different award show if you're in the industry. Not all of them are televised, and it's such a big marketing move. You got to realize that these are communication companies. They have billions of dollars tied up in the marketing and distribution of these entertainment venues, these entertainment vehicles, television shows and movies. And it's really a marketing move. So I don't think you're going to see it leave, even if the ratings go down. I don't think you'll see it leave the network broadcast because so much money is tied up in it.
Right. All of those advertising dollars. Mitchell?
A well-known political commentator on HBO stated that a lot of these award shows are like home mortgages that are 30 years with no interest.
Jeffrey?
So yeah, I always think of any award show as just a pat on the back, and a lot of times the award shows are the people that are putting it on are trying to pat themselves on the back, and that's why I'm not a big fan of them. I understand why they're there, and I think and a lot of people treat them like their sports team. They get behind their favorite people, and then if they don't win, then they complain about it. If they do win, they complain. They don't show up on the in memoriam like Bob Saget didn't do last night. They'll complain about it. So that's the big thing. And the other thing is, for the Daytime Emmy Awards, I really think that this show could actually be nominated for a Daytime Emmy, correct?
Oh, you know what? I think from the virtual, we'll have to do some research on that. Just saying, Alex.
I'm never going to do that. So it's I will not. Like, just so you know, I don't apply for awards. So anyway, so the I don't have. I'm kind of proud of the fact that I don't have any kind of certificate of anything anywhere. So and I plan to hold on to that record. I think that they'll be off the networks in 5 years. The bottom line is the advertising dollars are dwindling because the number of viewers are dwindling, and I think that they're just they're in quicksand, and they're not going to be able to survive much longer.
Bill?
The only thing I'm sad about in that area is that the crafts, and I'm thinking particularly about the fashion houses, there's a lot of other crafts, but that one's particularly, the whole red carpet thing. I do see the work of an incredible group of creative people who this is their moment to shine and go from being a B-level player to being an A-level player in many associated arts that hover around the Academy Awards. And I will miss that because you get these individuals who are shining stars but don't get a lot of public platform. And if they do spectacularly on the red carpet or in commentary or whatever, it can really enhance their careers. Take the show by itself, but it's the spin-off stuff. I'm more concerned about them.
Next question.
Jim Hankins in Chesterfield, Michigan says, what are some of your favorite macOS productivity tools?
David?
It's not specifically a macOS tool, but I've become a big fan of Notion lately. This is actually just the web interface, but you can have text, you can have links, you can have images. I always forget what my loopback setup should be. So if I get a new computer, I want to make sure that I have that in there. So I just screenshot it. I found it to be really, really powerful as a note-taking and organization tool.
Jason?
I have used Text Expander for many, many, many years, and it can be used for scripting. I use it, for example, for all of the boilerplates for my company's contracts. I absolutely adore it. I would say that is a great power tool. Also, the entire suite of Rogue Amoeba products. There isn't a single one that I don't use and absolutely adore.
Bill?
The number one, and I think I share this with Alex, is just the notepad. That I think is It's been so simple, and it is across all my devices. Apple keeps it in sync consistently. It literally does run my life now. I would be bereft of that. And it follows in the tradition of the original address book, where I had to, when I migrated from paper into a digital address book and realized that I could sync it to my phone, it changed my life once. The ability of this notepad that goes across all of them changed it again. I'm also a video editor, so Final Cut really did truly change my productivity enhanced it by a factor of 10 when I learned it. And I think there are some others, but those are the two that are primary in my life right now.
+1 on the notes. Alex?
Yeah, I think that notes is a big. It's open all the time, and I'm constantly adding things to it, and sorting things and organizing things inside of it. Also numbers. I do all my budgets on numbers because both Google Sheets and Excel make my eyes bleed, and then finally OmniGraffle. I do a lot of I'm rebuilding my system at home, and anytime I do that, I back up into OmniGraffle and build it. It's just I've used it for so many years. I mean, I used it since 1.0, so it's a really good productivity tool.
And Matteo?
I really, really love Launchbar. It completely changes the way you interface with your Macintosh. It's not just an app launcher. There are several. Originally, there was something that was called Quicksilver that was great. There's Alfred now. But Launchbar really becomes the center of how you organize your user experience on a Macintosh. And I'd be happy to share with anyone because it's a very, very versatile tool. And it gives you access to everything on the Mac instantly. And the other one is Magnet. It allows you to reorder your windows very quickly. And those two things are really useful for productivity and user experience.
Awesome. We'll be joining you in after hours for that, the launch bar. Next question.
Next one comes from Tony Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. Is Office Hours a program that would be in contention for a Webby, or is there another award we could be up for?
Jason?
In order to be in contention for something, you have to be nominated for it, and I don't think that's what we're about. Yeah, we check the boxes, but don't think so.
Courtney?
Yeah, I'm not sure. If they gave an award for most consecutive programs in a row without a break, we'd be winners.
Right. Mitchell?
I don't want to be, getting awards that you sometimes get. They're very easy to receive. It just doesn't mean as much to me. And
Alex?
Now, a Guinness Book of World Record, I think I'm into. Like, I actually like these award shows are they're just silly. But an objective one that is based on a measurement, and I actually think we should check. I actually think that there might be very, very, very few shows that have not missed a day 700 times. Because most shows are weekdays and the weekends and everything else. We should do some research on that. It's not out of the question that we are record holders or could find a goal of what might be a record.
Right. And Jeffrey?
I do have a little bit of knowledge on this because I did do a podcast for a long time. It was called Day in Tech History. And I did a podcast every single day. And I got up to 2,000 episodes doing it every single day. The only other podcast that I knew that did that was a 365-day astrological one, but they ended up missing a few of their podcasts, which then changed that whole thing. So I hit about 2,000
And you did 7 days a week?
I did 7 days a week. And
were they 2 hours a day?
No, they were not 2 hours a day, and I didn't have help either. So that's a lot. It was a lot of stuff, especially because every year new stuff came into it. So I stopped about 6 years ago, but yeah, it was nobody else has done that. So this show definitely could hit a world record easy.
Nice. Chris?
Alex, you're going to regret not recording those Sundays because now you can't verify it.
Oh
no, but there's still data from Zoom that it happened.
The Zoom logs should have it.
Zoom logs will still have it. So, and we have witnesses all the way through.
I have all the data.
Noah put in the chat. I think it was Noah who put in the chat, like at 1,000. Like when we hit that 1,000 mark, that might be.
Jeffrey's still way ahead of us. So
great. This is true.
We're just gonna have to double up, do 2 a day. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Next question.
Next one comes from Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas. Is there a way to find out within Mukana as to who the panelists are for a given day?
There aren't currently, but it's a good idea. So maybe we'll figure that out. Usually, the reason that there isn't that data right now is because we don't know. We don't know who's going to be on until they're on. So,
and it looks like we have one more first hour question. Bill?
Yeah, it's from Todd Worley, it looks like, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Best powder to knock the shine off for video.
Alex?
It's funny for me to answer this question, but the best powder is not a powder. It's a gel. It's called matte and or mattify. It is a gel, and it is quite magical. I can even put some on right now. See, I can show you live. See, you
live
put
demos.
Live demo. See, it's like QVC now. We've gone the whole way around. So you can see a little bit of shine on my forehead right there. And then what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of this on. It should largely go away. There it is. And there, see, all gone.
Call now.
Yeah, I don't do it every day because I feel like putting chemicals on my face every day is not a good idea. So I don't put mattify on every day, but I can. And when I do interviews and stuff, I do it. I use it. Obviously, it's sitting right here on my desk. So but it will diffuse the highlights pretty effectively.
Jason?
Much easier to find, or it'd be something like Clean and Clear, these little oil mats. And since we're doing demos, all right, here we go. See isn't that lovely? Oh boy!
And then,
if that gets memed,
leave it
there. Yeah, to soak up all the oil there. Bill?
I don't need to do it out here, but in Arizona, when I worked there for so long, if I had on-camera stuff, we would always use powder because it's so hot there that you end up sweating and perspiring terribly. I used to use MAC powder. I just told my wife, find me something, and she brought me a big brush and that powder, and I used to do my forehead and the apples of my cheeks because when it's 114 out, even under air conditioning, if you have to do anything for even a moment outside, you just turn into a sheeny mess. So happy to be in California now.
Thank you all for the great first hour questions. And now we're going to transition to our second hour where we're talking about business development and as the lifeline of what we have to do as entrepreneurs, owning agencies, or even contracting others is that cash flow, making sure that we have enough leads coming through the door. And we're just going to jump into just talking about that process. And this is a great time, if you have any questions around tools, around strategies, to go ahead and put those questions in Mukana. And Jason, we'll get you started.
All right. Since nobody else stepped up, I'll start this off. I've been running my own shop since 2009, and what I've found is almost as if by magic, if I put out what I'm kind of interested in, which tends to change over the course of time, I get bored easily. It's a superpower, if you ask me. But if you put it out there, I've found that simply talking to people and doing what you do and loving what you do for free for people is the very best way to get paid for it. I'll pass this on, but like that simple little thing where like needing to be good at something and needing to be the best at something is writ large a good thing, and I've found the very best way to do business development.
So just to come back to you on that, so you're saying just basically letting people know, because you're saying just putting it out there. How are you putting it out there?
Well, so honing your craft and doing it for free at first and deciding you're going to be the best at it. But I found that as you pivot or as you diversify and get better at different things, simply talking about it to the existing clients that you have, not as a sales pitch, but simply offering to do it, even if it's not on an invoice, tends to be, to me, the thing that inspires others to decide that it's that you're worth paying for.
Copy that. Alex?
Yeah, I think that for me, there's a couple things. One is that, and again, I don't tend to be a real salesperson. Like I don't do that very much. I just kind of do. I have to admit, I just kind of do my thing, and then people keep on asking me to do something else, and I do that. But I think that when looking back, there are a couple things that I do that probably gather more people around. One is that I like Jason, I take on things that I'm interested in and I do them, and I usually post them somewhere. Like, this is what I'm doing. I don't tell anybody that they need to do it. I don't need to tell anything. I just do, like, I'm just doing LiDAR. I'm just doing this. I'm just, doing, those things. And then people go, it's in the back of someone's head. I don't really do it to do that. I just do it because I'm interested in it. And that's the place that I'm interested in going next. I think that the other thing that I do a lot of, working with other teams gets you a lot of work. So when you're on a big show and you're working with a lot of teams, if you're difficult to work with, you're not going to get a lot of leads from all the other teams. If you're easy to work with, I mean, a lot of us hire each other, so a lot of production groups hire each other. You're like, oh, I really like that group. That was a really good audio group, or that was a good screen group, or that was a good infrastructure group. And so we kind of all sift together over time. So a lot of us that have been working together for 10 years for a reason, and we hire each other for a lot of the shows. And then finally, I think that the other thing that generates leads is really serving your market. So in a lot of ways, what we're doing here in office hours is how I've done that for a long time. So for 30 years, I've shown up at user groups talking about, it was like a little print user group in the pre-press user group or whatever in Denver, Colorado. And I would show things on how to do things in Photoshop and Quark Express, if everyone remembers that, how to do layout and so on and so forth that I had learned, or how to do something that I just figured out how to do the week before oftentimes. But I was sharing that stuff, and I found that generated a lot. I did it because I just found it interesting, but I also I think that one of the reasons that I did that, and even today, is that I've talked about this before, I'm not super social. So the easiest way to be social was I know this will sound crazy, but the easiest way to be social was to get up on stage and to show something, because then I knew that afterwards people would come talk to me and I didn't have to figure it out. I didn't have to introduce myself to anybody. So that was a kind of a coping mechanism for me to have people come to me rather than me have to go to them. But I will say that, one of the reasons that we have the panel, and one of the uses of the panel, is to give people the opportunity to serve their market, with their knowledge, and knowing that oftentimes has its own rewards later.
Bill?
So a couple of things. One of them is kind of normal in this. One of them was a thing that I did back when I was first starting out that worked remarkably better than I expected it to. So I'll tell you the story of it. The first thing is you have to know how to tell people what you want to do. And I emphasize what you want to do, because if you're just looking for any job you can possibly get, you're liable to fall into any job. And it might not be something you really want to do. And you could find yourself getting stuck in the success and building a reputation in something you don't want to work with. So there's nothing wrong with saying, who do I really want to work with a little bit, and doing that. Once you decide that, you really should work on what people often call an elevator speech, which is just, if anybody says, what do, you have a concise way to explain to them what you want to do. Even if you're really good and really powerful with that, then even if they're not hiring, maybe they'll pass that idea along to somebody else. And eventually people talk to people, and, oh yeah, the video, we need, that guy said something at a party about video, and I thought he was consistent and concise, and he seemed like a smart guy. So yeah, let's give him a try. Those kind of things really do work. So work on your pitch to whomever you run across, and use it as often as you can. The other thing, and it comes along with this targeting who you want to work with. I was once looking for the kind of people who were hiring, and I happened to be in the newspaper at the time. Remember, this is 25, 30, 35 years ago. And the newspapers were where people look for jobs. And I saw that they were hiring a new marketing director at PetSmart, which was based in my town. And I thought, well, a new marketing director may not have all the contacts that the current set of people is. So a new person coming in may be looking for something. And I thought, well, how am I going to get through to that? Because I called a couple of times. They said, no, we don't have a new marketing director. We don't have a new marketing director. Finally, they said, yeah, we've hired this guy named Tom. And I said, can I have his name, please? And I said, I just want to send a little something. And I racked my brain, and my wife and I sat down and talked about it, and said, he's going to start getting a bunch of stuff now. So how do we stand out? How do I make my pitch? I wrote a nice little cover letter, but how do I make an impression of some kind? And I was walking through one of those little tchotchke stores, and I found a little stuffed dog. And I thought, well, it's kind of hokey, but what the heck? Let me take my cover letter and attach it to the dog and have it delivered to them. And I thought it was kind of silly, and I didn't think, but I eventually got through to Tom. And as I was talking, he suddenly went, "Wait a second, Bill Davis, did you send me that dog?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that was cute." And I said, "How many things had you gotten in?" Oh, he said, "I got 100 people, but you're the only one who sent a dog." And my point was, I stumbled upon a way to at least stand out a tiny bit in a benign way and say, I understand what you do. That resonates with me. And hopefully this will help you remember who I am out of everybody else. So whatever it is you want to do, find a way to make it a little more personal, to make that connection. And I think there's a way to do that digitally. I think there's a way to do that with your pitches, but you gotta, then just focus on being good at what you do, because you'll eventually get that foot in the door. And sure enough, Tom had his current video people shoot in his store, and there were crickets all over the place. You cannot stop the sound of crickets. This was an accident. He was not responsible for that, but they didn't like the video, and they called me the next time. And I worked for him for about 14 years. And made probably 350 videos for them. So you never know. You just got to keep putting out the things you think will work and keep trying. Don't get discouraged.
Yeah, so we've heard putting, showing and letting people know what you do, your sales pitch or your elevator pitch, let's say that, your elevator pitch, and finding a way to stand out. Let's see, Noah, what you have to share.
Yeah, that's wonderful insight for sure. I kind of see two frames or perspectives happening. Obviously, there could be more, but it's from like a business owner's perspective and then a freelancer's perspective around business development. And they're two kind of completely different thought processes. So as a freelancer, you're looking for contacts and people to hire you to do your specific skill set or job or what have you, right? And I think that's how a lot of us come up, not many of us come from like a business, MBA background kind of thing and starting their own business and that kind of stuff. So as far as freelancing goes, I feel like there's just a natural cadence and kind of the right kind of dialogue between you and the employer and really the colleagues and the people that you work with. And so you develop that business relationship over time and you can grow in that and kind of have that natural cadence to that pace of like, hey, just so you know, I'm here, whereas in the beginning, you're like almost desperate for the work and you're begging, I guess, in a lot of senses in the beginning until you realize that natural cadence is just part of the industry. And so as far as like a business owner, that's kind of a completely separate mindset, a different mindset as far as gaining clients and shepherding them and talking them through the sales process and that kind of thing. I think that tends to be a little bit harder because we're not drawn to it. At least I wasn't drawn to it, talking from personal perspective. I've always kind of been the technician or the person behind the scenes developing that, not really the front person, like the salesperson that Alex and others have talked about, right? So I think we can just remind ourselves that we can get better at anything we put our mind to and put effort towards. And having mentors and people that have more experience than you can help get you out of a mental rut, especially if you're thinking it needs to be done a certain way, and rely on the people with more experience than you to come in and kind of say, actually, no, it could be done a little bit different, a little bit better. So, but progress is my kind of bar now that I'm less focused on like the number of leads and the number of jobs and the number of things. It's like showing up every day, making a little bit of progress every day.
And I like how you said that too, Noah, of just, from the just getting work from a contractor perspective, but then also the business owner and all of the responsibilities that entails. And that's kind of the hat that I feel like I wear. And even having this conversation of a lot of times, like Alex mentioned earlier, it's showing up, it's helping, it's sharing what, there's this interesting thing called live streaming and teaching that even online. And then people gravitate, or when people find that, I have to solve that problem, then they'll remember, myself, my team. But where we are right now is, we want to scale, we want to grow. So then kind of like from a marketing perspective, that's where the numbers are involved. And actually, like, how many times do we need to say, for an example, how many times do we need to do a training or invite some of our PR or marketing associates or past clients. So that's what I'm also hoping that from this conversation, just that there are some intentional ways that help to generate leads and the numbers around that. And there was, I don't know who originated this quote, but I saw the Kanye documentary on Netflix, and Jay-Z mentioned something of closed mouths don't get fed. And that could, it could go either way. But when you are sharing with others that one of the tactics, I think it was a consultant we were working with, and he said, now go back out to all of your past clients and tell them, some of the plans that you have for this year or some of the new technologies. And that's where building an email list. And, I'm sure this will come up in our discussion today, but just some of those tactics and strategies to keep having. It's one thing when people remember you, which is great. And that's awesome if there are enough people who remember to call. But then there's also building that pipeline, because depending on what kind of industry you're working in, when we're working with government folks, that is like 3 to 6 months of going through and talking and going back and forth to actually get to the contract. Well, as a business operator, you've got to have a number of those in the pipeline so that you can make sure that you're able to maintain cash flow. So just some of those things are what are constantly on my mind, top of mind. Courtney.
Yeah, I'm really probably the wrong person to advise people on business, but I've run several businesses, and my problem is that I've been an entrepreneur for many, many years, and but not much of a marketing guy. And I'm terrible at marketing because I'm too modest to try and sell my own ideas. And when we bring in marketing guys, you have to keep them in control, otherwise they get out of control and start promising stuff that the product doesn't do, or the product can't do, or could never do, because they're marketing guys. So I think my rule is never over leverage yourself. And all of my businesses that have lasted 20 or 30 years in business have been closely held. Don't bring in too many partners. Don't bring in leveraged money. Don't go into debt to market the product. Go close and stay long. In other words, keep tight control over the business, and you have much more longevity. The bigger you go, the faster, and the bigger you go, the more likelihood that someone's going to come in and take the company away from you, like Steve Jobs, had happened to him, and so on. And it's happened. There's tons of stories like that where entrepreneur starts a small company, brings in angel investors, they go big, they go marketing, and suddenly the entrepreneur is pushed out of the company and finds himself on the street, and the company may be going well, but you're just not in it anymore. So, be careful about that. And my rule is never spend more money than you have. And you can, as long as you can keep paying the bills and you keep making money, you can go a long time.
Wise words. Matteo?
Yes, a way also to build lasting relation and good relations relatively quickly, I found is, well, some people have already shared it, as a volunteer. But what I find really interesting is if you find conferences, physical or online conferences, where you can be a volunteer, part of the team somehow, and join and really be helpful, be there, give everything, you're going to build very strong relationship, both with the team, and usually volunteers in a team are usually people that is better to know and get to know. They are very positive minded and helpful. And you will also, of course, meet a lot of people who will be attending the conference. And if the conference is on a subject that interests you, well, you're going to have a very receptive public with whom you can bond quickly. And of course, if you're good at what you do, relations are important to get your job somehow sold.
Agreed. Jason?
I was reminded as Bill was talking about, just learning to be comfortable about speaking with respect to what you do. That in business school, the part that I hated the most about it was marketing. I absolutely despised every part of business school marketing courses. It's not that they weren't valuable. It's that they always just felt a little bit what I learned was that I was pretty convincing when I believed something, but that I couldn't sell something that I didn't fully believe in. And so to that end, learning how to speak, for example, getting a one breath, there's an elevator pitch and then there's one breath. For example, mine is that I build, fix, and teach technology. And then the one sentence, can expand a little bit more than that. And, simply getting comfortable about what you do and being able to speak conversationally about it, to me, is all you really need.
Yeah, that comfortability and it breeds confidence as well. And people want to do business with people who know what they're talking about. Well, looks like we can get into our first question.
It comes from our friend Vienna Tran in Adelaide, Australia. She says, when is it okay to do jobs and gigs for free?
Chris?
Hey, Vienna. I would say that although it's not a bad strategy to say I'm going to do some stuff for free to get work out of it, that you may be better off being very careful about doing things for free only for things you're super passionate about. I think that a genuine, transparent attitude about things is really important. I think people see that. And I don't think it's bad to ask to be paid for your time. I don't think it's bad to be a professional. I do very, very, very little stuff for free, unless Tom Sawyer talks me into whitewashing his fence for him, Mr. Preto. But I think you have to be really genuine. So do the things that you're super passionate about for free. That's my thought.
Alex?
Yeah, there's always things that I'm doing. I think I've talked about this in the past, but I think of my career and business and everything else like a big tank track. And I have, if you think of it this way, this is what's paying the bills. The one that's on the ground is the one that's paying the bills. This is something that I used to do that I'm trying to get rid of. Like I'm just not interested in doing that anymore. But again, that was paying. It was here, and it moved to here as this moved down to wherever I was going. And sometimes, that when you think about a tank track, there might be other things that I want to do way off in the distance, and this one sets that up, and I just keep doing that. And so this one here, and this one here, and this one here, I do a lot of free stuff. Like I do a lot of things that are, because I don't know how to do it yet. Like out here, I don't even know how to do that. So I'm experimenting with it, and I just want to show up and absorb information. This is one that I've started to figure it out there, and it will start to generate revenue at some point as it goes this way, and then it just keeps going. And my whole life has been me just tank tracking through things, and just kind of moving through and just constantly changing from one thing to the next. Now, some things I come back to, like concerts I'm working on now. I started working on concerts, 1989. So it's some of them come full around, but I'm doing the thing that I imagined 30 years ago. That we could do this, and so some things come back around, but I will say that a lot of us in a group of professionals, a lot of us will make requests like, hey, could you lend me something? Could you come help me with this? Can you bring whatever? And we do that. We do favors for each other all the time. And that's part of that professional bond that you build with a bunch of other people. That they're trying to do something, they don't have any money yet. You just come in and help. The people say, what am I going to get paid for that? Like for something that isn't making them any money. They're trying to figure it out. It's not making them money. If someone's getting paid and they're actually charging for your time and not paying you, that's a whole different thing. But if it's an opportunity to play with it, and you don't usually get that opportunity, then, a lot of us have people that will just come hang out. A good example was Nate. Nate came and just did Mad in the Kitchen, for free for a couple episodes because he wanted to see if this thing would work, like that he could cut shows. And then we figured out that, Nate doesn't need to be here to cut shows. And now Nate cuts shows remotely all the time. So it was like, but we had to wring out that system to make that work. And we were doing, we were making a $500,000 facility available and a bunch of our staff and things and everything else for Mad in the Kitchen, because we were interested in that problem. Like I'm interested in figuring that thing out, and I think I can make money with it somewhere in the future. And it definitely helped us kind of wring out a bunch of ideas.
Bill?
So during the years we were fully booked and kind of rolling through production, and we had, very little time, I tried my best to hold out 2 slots a year for pro bono work. And there were two criteria that I just used. Is this going to build a relationship, or is this going to build a skill that I want and that I can't find a way to get any other way? I found that as we got more and more production, as people asked us to do the same kind of productions, it was hard to break out of what we were already good at and get into the stuff that was peripheral to that, but that I thought could be really satisfying if we got ahead of it. And that's what I would try to use those pro bono slots for. I tended to say that you have to be a 501c3. You have to be, a legitimate. This isn't going to be a buddy-to-buddy thing, because those can sometimes end up taking tons, unless I'm, truly care about your thing and I'm building the relationship, which is one of those two pillars. But the other thing was, I really want to run this relationship just exactly like it's business. And I think I mentioned this once before. One of the things I used to do as I got higher level clients, and I was working sometimes for better and better charities on those pro bono pages, is that I'm going to charge you retail for everything. But then at the end of the project, when you pay me, I'm going to make a donation back to your organization as a 501c3 that is close to, if not the entire amount you paid me. And what I just wanted to do was make sure that I was working for somebody who took this as seriously as I was going to take it, that they had skin in the game. In this case, it was the retail check that they would have to write to me to make the project, after which they would get most of them back because they were a legit charity, and I wanted to support their work because I had analyzed their work, and I thought it was worth supporting. So those were my two things. I just think you have to take this as part of your business. But I think what Alex said is exactly right. You have to look for something, it really does have to be a little bit what's in it for you, because you've got a business. Your main responsibility is to your employees and the people in the business to keep things going properly. And you can't go off on a wild goose chase that's going to rattle your main business in order to do these things. But boy, it's the place. I can't tell you how many things I learned on those pro bono things that, why didn't I ever think of that before? And it really made me better at what I do.
Courtney?
Yeah, I'd say I agree with a lot of the stuff that Bill was saying there, and I was going to mention some of that. I wouldn't work for free unless it's a skill that I didn't know how to do. If I'm training, I'd work as an intern for free to try and develop a new skill, to learn from somebody who is already a professional at it. But if I'm already established as a professional in a job, I would never work for free, because then it becomes just a race to the bottom, because then that producer will come back to you next year. He says, well, last year you did it you gave us a half-day rate. Can't you do that again for us this year? And then, of course, you're dragging down the rates for all of your competitors as well. And once they start trying to match your rates for that, then it's just, like I say, a race to the bottom. So I'll do if it's a charity that comes to me and asks to do something pro bono, and if it's a charity I believe in, I will say, well, here's my rate, pay my rate, and I can make a donation if it's a charity I believe in. But that way it doesn't erode the market. It doesn't erode the labor market and the price, and it keeps things all in the up and up. And believe me, a lot of charities, will come to you and ask you, can you give me a special rate? Because we're a charity, we're a 501c. But believe me, half of those charities, the CEOs, the heads of that charity are, making millions of dollars every year. They're not doing it for free, unless it's a celebrity who's getting a lot of publicity over donation to that charity, and it's something that they believe in. A celebrity will do that, but general worker bees like us, who don't have a celebrity image to maintain, I would not work for free unless I'm just breaking into the market and a trainee and trying to learn the craft.
Noah?
Yeah, I agree with what most everybody said so far. The main thing is, when is it okay? It's okay when there's value and it doesn't have to be monetary value, right? So the value could be in you gaining experience. If you're new to something and you haven't gotten that experience before, the value could be in some sort of trade work, right? They can give you something from their product line, or something else basically that offsets that, publicity sometimes even. And another value could be like if it leads you to the next job or the next client, right? What I tend to do too is, if I work for somebody for free or do something for free, to me, I've essentially written off that client as they're not going to want to hone up to payment, right? And so basically, I'm not expecting them to pay me on the next one. If the first one's free, it's because I want to basically do a gift, so to speak, or not worry about money for that particular client, but I'm not expecting that to lead to the next thing. I've also noticed that for nonprofits, they try to have the value add be publicity. In my experience, that doesn't help. Like nonprofits aren't your advertisement vehicle. And then kind of what Alex said, I did have somebody take me on as a free intern and then charge a client for it. And that has set a really bad taste in my mouth. So every project I do, no matter what the budget is, if I'm getting paid, my team's getting paid. And that's just a hard moral rule that I have now.
Alex?
Yeah, the one place that we find useful for with nonprofits, if I believe in what they're talking about and they seem reasonably organized, a lot of times I have certain ways that I like to run shows, and most corporate clients have their own way of doing it. And I want to do it a certain way, and they're not ready to see it, and I don't have an example I can show them so I don't have something I can show them. So I'll talk to a nonprofit and I'll say, I'm fine with doing this for free or for a very reduced rate, but I get to run the show. like I get to design your show. I get to run it the way I would run it. You're going to tell me what kind of content you want, and I'll put it together, and I'll give you, we'll hire a team and we'll do a thing. And like we've done these before where we'll put all that stuff together and do it for very little money for them. And the reason I'm doing that though is that they have to sign away that I can use all that content. I can use the behind the scenes. I can use the there is still a value, as Noah was talking about for me, is that I need that because I need a full show. Again, it's one of the reasons that we were trying to figure a bunch of things out. That's why we did the Mad in the Kitchen thing, was because there were things that we needed from that we got. And that was a huge benefit for us.
And just to throw out too, as if they're asking, if there's an opportunity for you to do something pro bono and you find value in it, and if you're looking at this as a lead generation, to go ahead and ask and see how you can even negotiate for something for yourself, whether it be, you have no problem doing this one and trying to maybe secure some other projects. Of course, use that with a grain of salt of just understanding what they're asking you to do. But it's not just a one way. Like, this is an opportunity for you to ask for something as well. So just putting that out there as well. And then Chris.
Yeah. Alex, you just said something about, negotiating additional things. I had a couple of years where I had a couple of dear friends who passed away, and it's a complicated, long story, but there were a couple of things that I cut for them for memorial stuff. And it was mostly just because of the friendships, but I said, I'll gladly do this for you, but I have to get Final Cut for it, And it was something, it was actually a very good one. In one case, it was a very good friend who was also a client in his big company. And I said, I'll cut the memorial video, but I have to get Final Cut for it, because because he was such a good friend, and I produced a lot of videos for him. And I just wanted to make sure that it still felt like Gordon would have loved it. And I didn't want it to get beiged down by a bunch of corporate worry warts. I was just like, if I get Final Cut, I'll gladly do it. And it was nice. They gave it to me. They were very respectful, and Gordon would have loved it.
Awesome. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Vienna, Tran in Australia again. How do you say no to a client without impacting your relation or your working relationship with the client? For example, what are your tips for word choice when negotiating or saying no?
Yeah, so we actually have some boilerplates that we've already pre-written. So that, because depending on the situation, it might be maybe a little emotional, and just to take all of the emotion out of that, we'll typically, like, at this time, we are, either at capacity or just really focusing on the project itself, because, rejection is a hard thing, no matter if you're an organization, you're dealing with people, remembering when you are in sales or when you are working with the client, these are people. So we try to keep it as focused on the project as possible, and keeping it to whether it be timelines and how this meets our timeline, or that we've done all of, if it's something pro bono at this time, we've maxed our pro bono, we'll, re-up at a certain time. So just keeping it to the project is how we do that from a language perspective. Noah?
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to how you've defined the scope of the project with your client. And that's not 100% of the time, but the majority of the time. So you've set the parameters of this is what we're providing, right, for X amount of dollars or what have you, whatever the fee is. And so if something comes outside of that, you just have to be very upfront and it's not like an angry thing. It's just a matter of fact. Actually, this is kind of outside of the scope of our project. So it's going to be an additional fee. Is that okay with you? You know, something as simple as that. I know both Liberty and I have talked about Chris Do in the future, so please Google that, search that, take as much knowledge as you can from that. That's a huge help, right, with this whole subject and topic. So one of my professors in college said there's kind of this triangle. It's like time, money, and quality. You can only have two, you know. And then finally, like, if we're going to have a word phrase, I would say I appreciate that thought. Unfortunately, it's outside of the scope.
Agreed. And Courtney?
What I do is I use the calendar as a cudgel. I'll try and find out as much as I can about the project, and if it turns out to be something that I really don't want to work on, I'll just say, well, I've got a conflict on that date. I'll put a second hold, and if they're not willing to give me any information about the shoot before the shoot, since we're all independent, a lot of us are independent contractors in this situation, I'll say, well, I have something else on a loose hold on that date. What's the date? I'll ask the date, and I'll say, well, I have something else on a loose hold for that date. Let me find out, and I'll get back to you, and then I'll find out all the information about the project, what it entails, where it's going to be. You know, if it's like, oh, it's 4 days at the beach, on the beach, no. I'll suddenly have a calendar conflict. So I use the calendar as an excuse usually. Oh, the other thing I want to mention is if you're hiring personnel, if you're the contractor but you have employees that are going to be involved in that project, they'll ask if the client then gives you all the information and it works out that it's a job you want to do, and then suddenly they ask for a half-day rate or something like that. I'll say, well, I'm sorry, my contracts with my employees, I give half days. I have to pay them for a full day, so I can't afford to take this job and still pay my employees their full rate.
Alex?
Yeah, I will say that the calendar is the safest way to say no. Like, you do not need to tell people that you don't want to do their job. That's an unforced error. Like, it's just unforced to say that, just to say that, oh, it's conflict. Sorry, can't do it. But there's no, like, people get themselves into all kinds of trouble related to that, and lawsuits and all kinds of other things when all they had to say was, we're overbooked right now. Like, that's all they have to say is we're overbooked right now, and then you're out of it. And it's just a safe way to it's a really safe way to do that. And I would highly recommend doing that over ever telling a client that you don't want to work with them for any reason. Like, there's just no reason that's just an unforced error, as far as I'm concerned. When it comes to people asking for more than what they paid for, I never say no. I always say, oh my gosh, like some version of, that's a great idea, and let me paper up what that'll cost. Let me figure out what that'll cost to get that done. So I'll always say yes to everything the client wants to do within reason of time and whether it's feasible or not. But I'll always then say, okay, well, we'll come back to you with how much that's going to cost to add that to the thing. And then that's my way of telling them also that that's not part of the plan. That's not part of it. I don't say that's not part of it. I just say, yeah, that's great. Let me figure out how much more that'll cost to actually get that done. And it's just kind of a nice way to keep on saying yes, but, also letting them know that there's more money that is required there.
And then also, depending on the client or the prospect, if it's someone that you have a strong relationship with, is referrals. Like, if it's not something that you want to do, but someone that's in your network, or even pointing them into another direction, that can also, again, making you look like the hero of their situation. So that can also be helpful. Next question.
Next one comes from Dave Troutman of Edmonton, Canada. And Dave says, are film and video co-ops, nonprofits, a good way to get a foothold into this kind of career? Do producers ever look at these for new people?
Alex?
I think I've only looked at these a couple times in last resort. Like people don't, in this in the production world, it's very rare for someone to hire someone that somebody doesn't know. Like it's you're asking your Rolodex is everything, and so you're going to be asking people. That's why it's important to be useful in your community, whether that's doing things like being on this panel or working on some of the projects or doing other things or being and when you're on a show, you always want to be in your best behavior because everybody hires almost everybody based on who they know.
Courtney?
I'm not really even sure what a video or film co-op would be, but I know that you tend to stay at the level that you want to get involved with. If you're going to work for a low-budget movie producer who does, slasher films or Roger Corman movies, Roger pays a certain amount of money, but he's never going to move to the big time. And once you attach yourself to that strata of producer, the chances of them then getting the big break and bringing you along are very slim. If the producer who hires you suddenly moves from the lower tier to the upper tier, they're now in the upper tier. They're going to want to hire the upper tier guys. They're not going to want to bring the lower tier guys with them to the upper tier. They're going to have a chance to work with the more professional people than they've been used to dealing with. So I've found that you tend to get pigeonholed in a certain strata of business. And so if you like working on low-budget pictures and for the rate and you can exist on the rate that they pay, then go for it. But don't plan on moving up as a instant passage to the big time, because people that work in that strata don't tend to move up. And if they do move up, they don't take the little people with them.
Bill?
The other thing is that this business is an army of individuals who've mastered technology often. I mean, your camera operators, your sound people, these are complicated things. Even lighting, you would think just take the light over there and set it up, but there's a lot that goes into that. So generally speaking, to bring in equipment and bring in people separate can be difficult unless you really know your people well and know that this is an ace operator, and no matter what camera you put on their shoulder, they're going to be fine with that because they've been in the business for a long time and they know that. So you tend to hire package, at least I've tend to hire package people. I hired the person who knows how to shoot, and I asked them to bring the equipment that they're comfortable shooting with. I've owned equipment over the course of it, and I always know how to use it at least competently as I've built my repertoire, but I know that I can't do everything, so I've always had those specialists on the outside. So a co-op where I've always looked at it as like there's a couple of guys who own some equipment and they don't want to sit there and they're not that busy and they're trying to figure out how to get their stuff out of there, as opposed to the professional rental houses who are there as a system for maintaining equipment for professionals. And they generally only hire out to people who really know how, well, they'll hire out to anybody, but most of their work is done with people who know how to operate the equipment. So to me, the mind behind the equipment is always more important. So if you're going to try to be that and just get those separate people, I mean, it doesn't strike. It's like renting a piano and then asking your friend to play it for a wedding. Those two things are separate. You need the piano player. And then they will figure out what equipment to run if you want a really good job done, period.
And just, it was said earlier of just the idea two points that came to mind with this is, one, I'm not necessarily familiar with a co-op, but typically when we are looking at new people, that it's research that we have done either through asking for referrals from other videographers, lighting, whomever, but then also using them, bringing them into projects that are not, let's just say that there's a chance that whatever happens we'll be okay with it. So that's just how, from a discovery standpoint, which goes back to what was said earlier of making sure that you put yourself out there, and whether that be social, your resume, your portfolio. Two, one of the reasons that it's important, like the relationships that you build, even if you are new and trying to get on, ask someone, hey, can I come and work with you, so that people get to know who you are. Because there was a project that we had, this was some years ago, where we were already booked and we really wanted to make sure that we could help and support this client. And so I made a phone call to a couple of the videographers that we normally work with, and they introduced me to someone else via email. I made sure, and I said to them that we just need a quote so we can share it back with the client to see if they're available. To see if it works for the client. The client ended up changing their mind. This is an extenuating circumstance because it was very last minute, especially on the client's side of things. And the client ended up saying, you know what, we're just going to make do with what we have. Thank you. I went back to the videographer and said, you know what, the client has changed their mind. Thank you. I received this email about I got all this gear. We were ready to go. And now the point being is that shows me that this is someone who just, and I understand that they had put some effort into it, but it was also very clear that, hey, we just need to know if you're available and what's the quote to share it back. So there's just some things in addition to the technical skills, always looking at how people handle stress and how they handle issues. So just that's another one of the many reasons and examples of making sure that you work with someone first so that you understand their mannerisms, because it's more than just the final product of the video. Alex.
Yeah, what you just said reminds me of the saying that trust, arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. Yeah. And so and I think that it's really important to understand that one flare up can be the end of your relationship with a client, with a partner, with a whatever. You have to be super careful about that, because people have done that with me too, and that generally, like someone sending me an angry email, regardless of what I did, sending me an angry email is the end. It's like that's it only takes one, and I'll just be like, okay, we're done with that person.
Ask me if I've called them back. Ask me if I've called them back.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just kind of like, so you just have to know that in the corporate world, that there is a lot of kind of genteelness of like, hey, just checking in to see about my check and but people get into this thing where they start giving people a hard edge, and that's the end of that's the end of the time you get to work with that group, oftentimes, and so it's very hard to rebuild that. The other thing that I was going to say is that I think Courtney's view of it is very Hollywood, like people will leave you as they move up the ranks. In corporate, it's a lot different. I find that a lot of us stick very close together. You build a team in corporate, and then we pull each other through, because when we, a lot of us start at one place and we become very cliquey. and I think this has to do with, I actually think this has to do with unions, is that we're not unionized and we get very cliquey because we don't have calls, and we don't have, it's not as transitory for us. And so we, because with, so what happens is that, in the corporate world, it's kind of the opposite, in the sense that you do want to hang on to the folks that you have there, and then you have their back. And so the big thing for us is that everybody has each other's back. You start talking about someone behind their back and you're not going to get to keep working with them. But they will pull you. I mean, I've been pulled through many, many things of people who started very small, doing little things, and then we ended up doing big shows because we helped them when they were working on little things. But at the opposite side of that, from what Courtney was talking about, is again that the corporate world can be very cliquey, and getting into that clique is very hard, because once it's working and we have a team, we will almost never hire someone that is outside of our team.
And Bill.
Exactly what Alex is saying. I was going to reflect at least a little bit of that, in that, yeah, if, Daniel's my camera guy, he's been working with me the last 5 projects. If Daniel's book, I'm saying, Daniel, who do you know that I can go to that you trust? Because it is a network. And, what I want Daniel to say to that person is that, yeah, you should work for Bill because he pays on time and he'll treat you right. The reputation is everything at that point, and that's how you build those things. The other thing I was saying is that there's also a very specific language around this. I mean, we've all heard, can you pencil me in for Tuesday? I'm not sure it's happening. Can you put a soft hold on that? Can you put a hard hold on that? There's just these nuances that we learn back and forth in the interaction between humans that kind of signal, okay, you should count on this one. It's a book date. And if you said it's a book date, then you have a certain expectation that they're prepping up in terms of personnel and equipment for that booked date. And if you have to crash out of that for any reason, I've always felt like I'm on the line for at least a reasonable payment to them, because I've taken away their time for prep, unless they can resell the date to somebody else. If I put them on a pencil hold or a soft hold, everybody understands that I'm not sure of this. So that language, becoming sensitive to that, is real important too.
Agreed. Alex?
And for people wanting what is soft hold? Soft hold and pencil for a lot of us are the same, which is that you're going to be there unless and if you have something else, you just have to, we're expecting you to come back to me and tell me that it's being challenged, that I get access to that time unless I release the challenge and I'm willing to pay you for it. So once someone says that they're willing to be on a soft hold or penciled in, when you say adding to that, or you send them a contract or whatever, now you're going to pay them no matter what, and that usually happens, like, again, if their date gets challenged, in that process.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. In trying to expand into new market segments other than testimonials, what have you seen be successful to cross-promote?
Chris,
if you mean like with a particular client expanding your offerings, and I'm not 100% sure what you mean by the question, but I have on many occasions in the past taken that trust that I've developed with people, and I find that a casual presentation, like, hey, let me show you something really cool I've been working on, works much better than, can I schedule some time to make a presentation? And maybe it has a lot to do with in editorial, with producers back in the old days and the before times when they'd sit behind you while you were working, you do have downtime and you have the ability to, show off cool things. But that's what I've done. I've found that casual presentations of things that I've been working on to a particular client has worked well.
Alex?
Yeah, doing cool things and then of the things that I want to do, and then showing behind the scenes of doing it is a big piece of it. I did a little video called The Road to 1080p, which was, mostly I did it because we were running out of, I couldn't get the actual 1080p stuff to come out the other end. And so that was I put it there, but I did that. That video probably made my company $2 million of work. Like, just to put it in perspective, it was amazing. I showed that to so many people. I watched it so many times. I learned more about keying, compositing, and bit rate from that video. And it was literally a panic. And I just I was just drawing on the screen, and the whole thing took like a couple minutes to make, to put it together. And there was no real post or anything else. We just put it out. And, but what happened is that suddenly I've just told everybody that I've got 444 cameras, that where I was the only one in Northern California that had one. So suddenly we had work with Revision 3, we had work with Adobe, we had work with Salesforce, we had, like all those things came out of that one little video that I threw up. So showing, and again, what I would recommend is not doing anything that feels like marketing, like on LinkedIn, like anything that even like, I just say like, hey, this is what we work. This is something cool. And I don't usually show client stuff unless it's a client that I've released it with and I've talked to them about it or whatever, and it's really old. But new stuff, I tend to, I do free stuff so that I can show it, because the stuff that I get paid for, I can't show. But I don't do I don't do any preamble, like we really want to thank this company for this or whatever. I just show, hey, this is what I do something, and then I break it down. This is what that actually looks, and it's kind of cut and dry. And I find that to be, I just do it because I enjoy it, but it does tend to turn into work.
And to follow up on what Alex just said, just depending if you mean, because just getting context of your question, if you're looking at new industries, so outside of your current clients, there's a combination of, yes, still marketing involved, but if that's a blog maybe, and or going back to, I don't know if you've got a mailing list that you possibly have for the current clients, but just letting them know, as Alex said, here's some new stuff that we're working on if you want to learn more, just like some of those, there's small words to just add on to that. But yes, definitely showing it and sharing it with the world is a way to do that. And then if there are people that it'd be useful for, just being also intentional in sharing resources, coming from that perspective is always helpful. Next question.
Leland Best is up next, and Leland writes, which is a preferred approach in presenting an AV event proposal? Written estimates with line items or a definition of scope to begin work? And does it really matter?
That's a good one. Jason.
I think it matters quite a bit. And there are two calculations that go into this. My internal calculation involves quite a bit of line iteming and kind of logistics, and this will cost that, and that will cost this. And the one that the client sees is really just a number. And if they say yes, I do my very best to just surprise them with what they end up with. For example, my deliverables are always on SSDs. I will give them an SSD. I will have it custom logoed. It looks neat. And, there it is. There's your deliverable, if it can be done digitally. Little things like that make a big difference. As far as line items, I tend not to work again with a client that likes to nitpick me. That said, everyone has their own style.
Alex?
Most of the stuff that I pitch, I don't give specific line items. I might give general line items. I give very detailed breakdowns of what I'm going to do, but I try to avoid line items as best I can. But with a lot of clients, you end up putting them in. The reason mostly is that it's much harder for me to be creative when I'm stuck with that, because when I have a big bucket, I'm like, oh, I saved money here and I'll spend it over here. And I do it specifically. And I know that there's a danger to that because people might try to get more margin. That's not usually my problem. My problem usually is that I'm trying to pack more into the project than there's money to pack, than there's money to do. So it depends on that process. But I think that as you work with larger clients, the line items become kind of expected. When I work on my own, I almost always tell people, when I'm quoting stuff, this is what I'll do and this is how much it'll cost, because that's really the number that they need to see.
Right. And Courtney?
I usually use the form that I use for invoicing to do estimates with. And then the only difference is it just says estimate at the top instead of invoice. And I will line item it for the basic day. If I don't know how long or how complex the project's going to be, I'll talk to them. I'll see what days it's going to shoot on. I'll put in the equipment required when I know enough about what the project is, and the personnel for the number of days at the basic day rate with no overtime. And then I'll mention to them, and I always list each item as, this is for an 8-hour day. If you go over 8 hours, here's what the overtime will cost you per hour, et cetera, so that they can, if they know they're going to go long on one day, but not on the other days, or some days are going to be shorter and other days, I'll let them figure that out, and I'll give them the line items so that they know basically going in what they can budget for. And that way there's no surprises when they get that invoice, because it's almost identical to the same form that they got on the estimate. The only additional things will be down at the bottom are a reimbursement for parking or overtime that happens on certain dates, and then I outline all of that overtime. The other thing is I don't split out as a service, as a corporation. If I'm providing personnel, I usually keep them. I do their time cards. I do their, all their withholding and everything else. So they're my employees. That way, and they'll ask me many times can you? And this is the rate for our services per day. And I won't break out what I'm paying the employees or what the employees' rates are. They don't know any of that. Because that's between me and my employees. And because if you do break those rates out, they will start to try and nickel and dime you. Say, well, what if we have one less guy? Or what if we have, can you give us this rate on the equipment? Can you give us 20% off this equipment? And if they don't know how much of it is equipment and how much of it is personnel, then you have a little more bargaining power in negotiating your price.
Yes, +1 on all of that, Courtney. We do the same thing too. Bill?
So I had two forms that I used consistently to bid my projects. The first one was what I called a production estimate, and it was a FileMaker Pro sheet that I built over the course of time, and it had the traditional movie structure above the line, production, and then post-production below the line stuff. And I used to fill that out really specifically, and it told me how many cameras, how many days, how many people, how many days, everything up to and including some contingency stuff. And it would ratchet all the numbers that I put in there when bidding things out and come up with a total. And then there was a little box next to it that said, based on industry standards, there are contingency fees. For example, post-production will have a 6% contingency fee. And I would explain that that's for miscellaneous stuff. I mean, tapes and stuff like that. Now that would get filled out and I would get my number from that. And then I would move that over onto what I called the job quote. The job quote was an exposition of how many cameras and how many days up to. It's always up to 3 cameras, up to 2 days of shooting, up to this many things and up to that. So that in case things got simpler, I didn't have to go back and requote anything. And then at the top of that, there was the number. Occasional, I would turn that in. I would never turn in the production estimate unless somebody wanted it to go through accounting. And if it went through accounting and they needed a breakdown, I would send them my production estimate. And I found that process really eliminated most of the problems in negotiation and problems. And one of the things that I did on the production estimate is my very first number, and it was bold, is the production fee. And I would say to them sitting at point of the desk, this is what you're paying me to make your video. Everything else is variable. Everything else can float depending on how many hours, how many cameras, how many days. I never had a single client in the whole time I was in there ask me to cut my production fee. Not one, because they're essentially saying, I don't think you're worth that. And I didn't have a client ever who said that to me. So I had to be careful about what it was, and I had to get the number right. But that, putting the production fee, what I'm getting paid to make your video up front, was a technique that really saved me a lot of guff. We would sometimes argue in the weeds of, well, can we do this for, $1,000 less or $3,000? Well, let's look at the production estimate. Where can we cut back? 3 days. Can we go down to 2 days? Do we need 3 cameras? Can we do it with 2? All of those things were up for discussion, but they never went back above the line to the fixed expenses. Just letting you know that.
Next question.
The next question comes to us from Liberty White in Atlanta. What should you include in your elevator pitch about your business?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about it. Just an opportunity to clarify for folks. Jason?
Just as you've been listening to this last hour, 4 gems that you can adopt into your own thing, I would say keep an ear out for your own gems and understand the neat, cool things that you've been doing that, you can just tell a story to a client in an elevator about things that may just get them thinking about the things that you've done for others. I'd say that's a pretty good addition.
Alex?
I try to keep very, very short. And I try to keep it something that's going to start a conversation. I'm not trying to tell them everything that I do because that would be very hard. So for me, if someone asks, what do you do? I mean, this is someone at a baseball field or someone at business. I say, I design and execute complex live events for live streaming. And that's it. Like, that's what I do. And then then they go, oh, if they're not interested in that, then they're not interested. Like if they're in my field or if they're in something in the world, then they'll ask more questions. But there's certain things I ask everybody what they do, and they'll say something, and I'll make a decision really quickly whether this conversation is going any further. Like, I'll just go, oh, I don't know anything about that, or that's not something in my field, and then I might talk to them about the weather or something like that, or I usually move on. But I think that's fine. I'm just not wasting anybody's time. So I think that usually what really is hard is when you ask someone what they do and then they go on for a long time about something that might not be a direction that I am interested in.
John?
Our conversations with clients have been focused on their ROI. And so we're seeing significant ROI on digital first events over physical events. And that's where our focus lies.
That's great.
And then just to toss out some practical parts of it, is like who you are, what problem do you solve, and how do you solve it? And you can tell your story around those elements and weighing what you want to talk more about or not, but just putting that out there just as you, and be sure to write it out and have one that's like 10 seconds if possible. And then one that if you have more time in the elevator, you're going up to the penthouse. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Eduardo Augustine in Panama. He says, how to apply the pay yourself first method when starting your business.
Courtney?
I have no idea what that pay yourself first business is.
Right?
I've started several businesses and I've always been the guy who pays himself last. So what I will do is bill what I would have to pay somebody else to do my job if I weren't doing it, but just the minimum wage, what I'd be agreeing to pay somebody else. And if there's profit in the business, I only take that out after all the money has changed hands. I don't count on that ahead of time. Of course, there are a lot of businesses that it depends. If you want to start a business, make a bunch of money and get out of it and get into something else, then sure, pay yourself big salary up front and try and get investment capital in there and let other people pay you. But don't count on longevity in that business, because if you're not profitable, you won't be around for very long. So I've always paid myself bonuses at the end of the year after we see how much money we've made for the year. And if we haven't made any money, I don't get a bonus. So a lot of my work is gone for free many times because I own the business and I have to be accountable for the bottom line and making payment to all those paychecks to the other people.
Bill?
So when I was very first starting out back in the olden days, I went to a Chamber of Commerce thing to talk about business structure and the rest of that, just to get the very basics down. And this has been around since then. And it really, I think, comes to, are you putting something aside with every bit of money that comes in so you don't get yourself in trouble and you don't get out over your skis too far? And I think it's true for just, even if you're not running a business, putting things away, a percentage, some sort of a thing that you pay yourself first before you start going buying more equipment and things like that. If you don't allow for that, it's really easy in this business to go chasing the thing that you think is going to get you to the next level in terms of gear or techniques or something. And I see a lot of people really who get to where Courtney's describing, but don't understand it. I mean, he's way ahead of the game because he understands that there may be a plan when he's paying out more than he gets in. I'll never forget, there was one moment in my life that we were doing a lot of print advertising for a local big car dealer. And at the end of the year, they sent me a magnum of champagne. And I went, wow, wait a second. And I looked back and sure enough, I had paid for rush charges to that graphics company more than I took home the whole year. And they were always pushing me to rush things and they were always doing that. But I realized that I had not managed the client properly. And I was wasting the client's money by not being tougher about deadlines. And it's so easy to lose track of the expenses in the weeds because you're not paying attention to them. And you cannot do that and survive in a business over the long run.
Very true. Next question.
Dave Troutman is up next. And Dave in Edmonton, Canada says, does anyone here add a nuisance fee to their estimates when they think a proposed production will be more trouble than it's worth? Fully refundable if it turns out the client was not a nuisance.
Jason.
Wow. No. The short answer is no. No, I don't. And I don't tend to take business that I think will require a nuisance fee. More importantly, I'm always learning for the next job and the next client. If I'm going to take on the job, I'm going to finish it. And, I'll go back to Liberty's ask me if I call again. That's my nuisance answer.
Alex.
Yeah, solving those. You solve problems with partners, with people that you hired, and with clients on the next event. So when they come back for the second one, you do the first one, you do it well. You have to look at it. I definitely, there are certain clients. There's tendencies that clients will have, and if they have those, I tend to put in more buffer. So like this might, and I'd much rather. There's two different ways of approaching these. I'd much rather come in heavy at the beginning and then figure out a way to pull back than to come in light and then try to halfway through the show tell them it's going to be another $3,000 or something. That's in a corporate world that is not handled well. So we do the best we can not to do that.
Courtney?
Yeah, if it's a company I've never worked for before, so I don't know what it's like to work with this client, I'll do the job. And then at the end of the shoot, I'll go up to the production manager or producer and go, and he'll go, great job. I'll give him the invoice. And I'll go, oh, did I give you my card? And he'll say, no. And I said, good. That's my subtle way of saying, I don't want to work for you anymore. But there are certain clients, and there's a client in the commercial business here in Hollywood. I don't want to mention any names, but JP are his initials. And we charge him double. We just double our rates for working with that guy. He's a director, and he's He's just ruthless. He's known to dress down people, call agencies idiots on the set, and ask them what they're getting paid. And I've seen him bring many script supervisors to tears on the set. Because he's such a ruthless director. But we know his story, and we know it's mostly a show. It's gruff, and he knows we'll do the job for him and do a good job for him. But he's willing to pay double the rate of anybody else in town because they know he's going to step on some feelings, and you have to be very thick-skinned to work with him, and he has to pay for that.
Yeah, and to tie a bow, and just even with what Courtney said, is at the end of the day, you have the option of one, you don't have to take the job. Two, if you do take the job, you understand the value that you're bringing to the table. So having a specific line item that says that, I don't necessarily think that's necessary. You just understand that you're going to add, whether that be 10, 20%, whatever it is, because you understand the work that is going to need to be done to ensure that you show up in the best way that you can. And Alex?
Yeah, and that just goes back to what we talked about earlier, is never turn someone down and pick a fight with while you're doing it. The two ways out are that you have too much schedule or you bid your way out of it. You just make it expensive. Like, this is what it costs for me to do it this way. And then they do that. But the easiest way is just to be busy.
There it is. Well, we've come to the end of another show. Thank you to all of our producers for the great questions and feedback. I saw all the conversation happening in the chat. And to our panelists, thank you again for all of your experience and sharing that with everyone. And for those of you who want to continue the conversation, we're going to hop into after hours, and we'll see you next time. And then this is where...
Yes. Oh, I can't wait. Okay, cool. Yeah. So look at all these people that work on this. It's incredible.
Awesome team. Look at that.
You should put little flags next to them so you can see how.
That's pretty great.
They have a little map with little dots on it.
Yeah.
Maybe some confetti.
So weird.
Chris, you're breaking the flow. You can't talk normally. You've got to do it like this.
How is this sticking right now?
Don't press the play button.
I thought you turned the play button straight up. What's going on? Oh, Alex is gone.
Yes.
Bummer.
Great show, everyone.
Bye. Great job, Liberty.
Happy trails. Thank you.